Teamwork isn't just nice to have in business, it's the undisputed competitive advantage. When your team members work as a unified force, your whole operation benefits through higher productivity, thriving creativity, and unstoppable momentum. Welcome to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast, where we share with you strategies and tactics to help you develop game-changing teams so that you and your business can make a real difference in the world.
What to do when the leader that you're working for creates chaos? That is going to be the topic of today's Impactful Teamwork podcast. So super excited to have you here today. And my name's Julia Felton, and I'm going to be guiding you through this next 20 minutes or so while we delve into this topic of having a leader that absolutely creates chaos around them rather than clarity. And if you're like me, I bet you've probably been in that situation. I see it happening so many times. And actually, today's podcast is inspired by the fact that this is a topic I've been coaching a number of my coachees on recently. They're working for CEOs, leading large organizations, going through a lot of restructuring, a lot of change. And the CEO is in a little bit of chaos. They don't really know what's happening. And they're putting out that really dysfunctional energy that I talk about. The sparkler on bonfire night, it's going all over the place and it's not focused. And this can create a lot of disruption for team members. So I wanted to share with you today some strategies and tactics that you might be able to use if you're experiencing this situation. And we know that when we're working for a CEO or the leader themselves is really scattered and chaotic, it really has an impact on everybody in the organization. We talk a lot about the ripple impact, and nothing happens with more clarity than the negative ripple impact that comes from a chaotic leader, because it stalls innovation. Team members don't feel psychologically safe. There's a lack of trust often within the organization. People aren't sure what's going on. And generally, we end up with a little bit of a toxic culture. And yet from the outside, the business looks fine. The numbers are doing really good. And maybe if you've got an executive board, they're ignoring it. And inside, you as team members are firefighting the implications of this, working hard to hold things together. And I've been in this situation. I've worked for a boss who was very chaotic, very controlling. You never were really sure what he wanted, what was going on. And actually, it created one of the most toxic cultures I've ever worked in. And this is all backed up by research from McKinsey, because a McKinsey study found that 45% of company performance is directly tied to the effectiveness of the CEO. Think about that. 45% of the company's performance is directly tied to the effectiveness of its CEO. And we know from research from Gallup that 70% of team members leave managers who they don't enjoy working for. As a leader, you have a responsibility to ensure that you are delivering clarity and not creating chaos in your organization. But also, you might have departmental heads, other leaders within your organization that are actually creating the chaos too. As the CEO of the company, you need to take swift action in order to mitigate the impact that leader is having on their area of the business. There are things as a team member, if you're working for a leader that is very chaotic, that you can do to influence the outcomes. Because clearly we can't change the CEO's personality. We might suggest that CEO has some coaching to help them get that clarity and focus so that they can share that with the team. But we can't fundamentally change their personality, but we can influence some of the outcomes. And if you are a departmental head, what can you do to protect your team and keep the performance with your team on track whilst steadily mitigating the chaotic challenges of the CEO? And today I'm going to share with you 5 proven ways to do this. This is drawn from a bit of research from the Harvard Business Review. And I'll link them back to the natural intelligence of horse herds that we find in my Unbridled Teamship roadmap. So let me set the scenario for you. Your name is Susan. You're the chief marketing officer of a fast-growing tech company. The CEO is brilliant, but they're also really impatient. They're really intolerant of dissent, and they're quick to shut people down. And trust scores are plummeting, but as I said, revenue keeps climbing, so the board overlooks what's going on. And as Susan, this leaves you in a bit of a dilemma about what to do. Do you change your style? How do you protect your team to deliver results and still influence the direction of the business, where you're in a situation where the CEO can't prioritize what's going on? That's why you've got this chaotic style, because there's no clarity about what's happening. So what I would highly recommend here is you don't fight the chaos. You don't fight the CEO head on. Instead, learn to speak the CEO's language and really start influencing and reshaping the system from within. I want to share with you 5 strategies that you can do this with. And the first is called manage up with intention. And what is managing up with intention? Actually, this is really about how do we create alignment. It's not about being a yes person and doing everything the CEO says. So it's not about appeasement, but it is about how do we get alignment between everything. And we know that alignment is a key priority within business. So if you were Susan in this case, you probably want to find out what outcomes matter most to the CEO. Is it growth? Is it investor confidence? Is it client satisfaction? So figure out what the CEO's priorities are, and then you can reframe everything through that lens. And there's a framework called the SCR framework that I'd like to suggest, which is situation, complication, and resolution. So let me just share an example. The situation is we're on track to launch the campaign next month. The complication is that maybe the early testing shows that the adoption risk could undermine investor confidence, because what we're getting is initial feedback from the market that they're not really sure about the product. And what we don't want is the investors to get cold feet and pull any funding. So what's the resolution? It might be delaying the product launch for a few weeks so that we can get more social proof that it works. And therefore we can give investors the confidence of its value. So when Susan speaks the language of a CEO, which is growth and investor confidence, you can go from being seen as obstructive to being seen as a strategic asset. So how do we see this happening out in nature and in my herd of horses? Of course, horses don't follow the words. They follow energy and clarity. And of course, when a lead mare senses danger, she signals it to the herd. Here's the situation, here's the risk, and here's the safety direction. So it's concise, clear, aligned to what matters most, which in the case of my horse herd is survival. So how do we really discover the true priorities of our CEO so that we can reframe everything around this? And actually, this is exactly the strategy that I suggested one of my coaching clients adopted this week. She's in a new role. She's moved to a new country to take up the role, and she has hit the ground running. She's had no onboarding. She has worked in the company previously in another country, but as we know, the rules of the game are different in different areas of the business. I said to her, number one priority is to get time with her CEO, with her boss, to find out what they really want her to work on, because there are so many things that she has unpacked in the last couple of weeks that need addressing. But if she goes down the route of addressing priority A, when that's really low on the list for her CEO, that's not going to do her any good, even though it's really important. So I think getting that alignment on priorities is really important. And this builds really nicely into the second strategy, which is all about building agreements on communication and roles. So we need explicit agreements, because what I often see is chaotic CEOs change direction midstream. They maybe revisit decisions and override execution. And what happens is what we call something called organizational whiplash, because you think you're going in one direction and all of a sudden you're pulled in another. So in this scenario of this chief marketing officer, her and her peers need to agree on the decision and actually on who is taking responsibility for decision making, who is accountable, who decides, who gives input, who executes, and then who needs to be informed. And also then agree on the rhythm or the cadence of meetings so that you know exactly what's going to happen. And maybe your meetings are always starting with facts. Then we think about what's the implication of what's going on. Then we make an interpretation and then we make a decision. So the analogy here in my horse herd is about setting boundaries, because actually clear fences create safety. And boundaries in the pasture don't actually stifle the horses, the fences. They actually enable flow because they keep everyone safe. They create that psychological safety, right? I know the horses are safe. They know that they're safe within a particular area. So when we're in chaos mode, maybe the question we need to ask is, where are we missing agreements? Where are we not in consensus about what's going to happen? And therefore, how can we get consensus so that we can therefore create some momentum behind the project that we're working on, and we don't spend loads of times in this organizational whiplash going one way, then going the other, which results in a lot of rework of things happening. Third strategy is all about amplifying the external voices. So this is really interesting because what we typically see is CEOs, they might dismiss Susan or other people internally within the business, but they rarely dismiss feedback from clients or investors or the board. So one thing that Susan can do in this particular case is back her recommendations up with social proof from other people. So it might be things like a customer saying, we're getting really frustrated by all these different product changes. Or a board member saying, I'm really confused. I thought the strategy was A, but it now seems to be B. So getting that external stakeholders to be providing feedback into the CEO can be really useful. And this is why I suggest that clients have, if they don't have them, a virtual board. A virtual board is a group of people external to the business that look at the business, but they're looking at the business through a different lens to the CEO. And they can see some of the pitfalls that are happening within the business, or indeed the opportunities that maybe the CEO has missed because they're so blinkered in terms of what they're doing right now. So just like my horses, CEOs can't ignore the external environment. And just like my horses who have to respond to the external cues, might be a shift in the wind. Today, as I'm recording this, it is super windy. We've had about 24 hours of what feels like solid rain. And the horses are on super high alert because, of course, when it's windy, it's very difficult for them to hear and sense where any danger is coming from. So they have to be super, super vigilant. And I think what really in business I notice is a lot of CEOs have the danger of getting their head down, being really blinkered and focusing on what's in front of them and not really paying attention to the environment that's around them and what's going on there. So for Susan in this particular case, when she's preparing a kind of board paper, maybe to give to the CEO to suggest what needs to happen next, she really needs to try and get the buy-in of other people like the board, like customers, and help bring their voices into the room, which enables her voice to carry more weight and have more influence. The fourth strategy is all about coalition, forming a coalition with your peers. So I always say to people, don't go alone. Business is a team sport. That's why we work as a team. And talk about on the podcast, teamwork is a competitive superpower that you have in your business. So it's easy for a CEO, for example, in this case of our scattered CEO, our chaotic CEO, to dismiss the voice of one person. but very difficult for them to dismiss a united leadership team. That's much harder. So what does that mean? That means Susan needs to build trust with her peers and get them all aligned and on the same page before they work into meetings. And if together they present a joined up, comprehensive strategy to the CEO, then that's going to be a lot more powerful and provide more influence to get the CEO on side. And when we think about the horse herd, I love this idea of isolation, because actually what happens in a horse herd is the herd is safer together. That's why they stay as a team. And actually, the worst thing that can happen to a horse is to be pushed out of the herd, be ignored, put on the sidelines, because that's really dangerous for the horse, for their own survival. But where we do see it happening is with younger horses. They're in the herd and they're not following the rules of the herd. They've been disobeying them. And then they will actually physically get moved out of the herd and isolated until such point as they can demonstrate that they know how to exhibit the right behavior to be part of the herd again. So what we see here is the horse moving from ego to echo. And this is the same with business leaders. They need to move from this position of being very egotistical, it's all about them, to what's the ecosystem? How do they form part of that collecting, thriving environment? So in Susan's case, she might want to think about who are her allies and who could she align with so that she doesn't just survive the chaos, but she can bring coherence to it. And the fifth strategy is all about being patient. With chaotic CEOs, people that have done things for the same way for a long time, change is rarely instant. And progress tends to happen in layers. So we want to start with those small wins. Like I suggested to my client, really getting clarity on what her boss's priorities are and what her boss thinks her role is and what her boss wants her to do. And then add some, in her case, this could be some feedback from the team members about things that aren't working in the department. And then you're able to move to bigger shifts within the organization, embedding collaboration as a value. And learning what you can influence today and what seeds you can plant for tomorrow, as I said, because adaptability does take time. And I love this analogy actually from the horses. If there's a storm going on, the horses don't fight it, but what they rather do is they strategically position themselves in the best way to navigate a storm. So it's typically they put their backs into the winds and you watch them, they conserve energy and they wait. And they all huddle together in a small herd to keep them safe, keep them warm, but there's security in that herd. And then when that storm passes, they move again. Strategic patience is about pacing your influence. And maybe some questions to ask yourself are, what quick win can I deliver today that builds my credibility? What shift can I demonstrate this quarter to show my improvement? And over the next year, what longer term strategy can I start seeding? And so that's how you can start building sustainable change within an organization and with people layer by layer. So let's bring this all together. You can't transform a chaotic CEO style single-handedly, but you can mitigate the downside and create conditions for superior performance. So the 5 strategies to remind yourself are: manage up with intention, build agreements on communication and roles, amplify external voices, form a coalition with peers, and practice strategic patience. And I think these 5 things create a playbook for navigating chaos with clarity, just like my herd responds to the disruption. What's really interesting is that these 5 strategies directly align with my unbridled teamship roadmap, because trust is built by the collaboration and the clarity. Contribution is amplified through external voices and aligned roles, and adaptability is lived through strategic patience. So my questions for you to reflect on this week is, where is your team right now? Is it toxic? Is it turbulent? Is it tolerable? Or is it turbocharged? And what's one step you can take this week to shift towards unity, alignment, and resilience, even if chaos remains at the top? So if you want help diagnosing whether chaos might be eroding your team's performance, I invite you to take the Turbocharge Your Team quiz at businesshorsepower.com/quiz, and then book in for a Turbocharge Your Team audit, where we will identify exactly where trust is breaking down, where contribution is blocked, and where adaptability is needed most. And that will enable you to get clarity on the next steps to create a team that performs with power, purpose, and flow, no matter what is happening at the top of the organization. So until next time, remember, in business, just like in my herd, chaos doesn't have to be the end of the story. With trust, contribution, and adaptability, you can lead your team through it and even emerge stronger. So until next week, have an amazing time and look forward to seeing you on the following podcast. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast. Please stay tuned for future episodes and do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favorite platform. Recommendations are essential for attracting new listeners. Please follow us on social media at Julia Felton and at Business Horsepower. And if there are any topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes, please do let me know. Remember, you and your team are always making an impact. What impact will you make today?